Hello everyone. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much for joining our live. Today's live is with Johnsons and Johnsons. We're going to be talking about maternal mental health. Thank you so much, Johnsons, for giving me this platform and the opportunity to talk about maternal mental health. I know I've shared my story before, and today we're going to answer your questions, your concerns with Dr. Lavina, who's going to join us now. I'm just waiting for her to join and then we can start. I have your questions with me right here, and I think it's really nice that we have this opportunity to address these questions, because I know a lot of you go through it. And when I started, I did not have any knowledge when I was going through postpartum depression. So I feel like I wish I had such an opportunity. Okay, so we have the questions today. I'm gonna wait for Dr. Lavina to join. Just give me a minute. These things take a little bit of time. So a question that came a lot was, we will answer that as well, and also transitioning from one baby to the first baby to the second baby, because I know it's tough. It's really tough. Walaikum assalam, everyone. Okay.
Hi.
Hello, Dr. Lavina.
Sorry about that.
For joining.
Hi. Thank you for having me. And thank you for Johnsons & Johnsons doing this initiative.
Yes, it's really nice, because the questions that we get, I felt like these things need to be addressed, and we've got a platform here. Thanks to Johnsons for letting us host this live today. And shall we start?
Yeah, absolutely.
Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, absolutely. My name is Dr. Lavina Ahuja. I am a counseling psychologist currently working at German Neuroscience Center. I have been a counseling psychologist over here in Dubai with close to about 12 years of experience now, since I kind of graduated with my doctorate. And being a woman, being a mom myself, this is obviously a huge area of interest that I've kind of learned a lot about, and I'm really excited to kind of help spread awareness around this topic.
Okay, amazing. So we'll start with let's start with mental health during pregnancy, what women go through, and the hormonal changes, their mood swings and whatnot, and how they can prepare themselves for the pregnancy and then the baby.
Absolutely. So one of the things that I usually tell my clients whenever I kind of do have clients who come in and during pregnancy, first of all, it's really normal to kind of have some level of anxiety, some level of nervousness during pregnancy. It's very normal for a lot of moms to kind of be really anxious about, okay, is the baby moving? Is the baby moving enough? Is the baby, like, this level of anxiety is actually really normal. I feel like it's kind of preparing you in some ways for motherhood. It's preparing you to kind of care for another being, which is a big responsibility. So it's really normal to kind of have anxieties around that, and to kind of have anxieties around, am I going to be enough? Is this going to be enough? And what I would kind of also tell people is it's really normal to kind of like Google everything. One of the best things you can try and do during this time is, I think, kind of try and join a lot of those forums that kind of have a lot of women who are kind of going through the same journey with you at the same time, because you get a lot of information sent to you and a lot of women who are asking the same question, which then makes you kind of feel like, okay, it's not just me, which really helps. I feel like normalizing this really, really helps, and it's okay. Part of it is also understanding that When you kind of have very, very intense emotions, so during pregnancy, it's very normal to kind of be a little bit more irritable than normal. You're in discomfort. You're preparing for a big responsibility. It's a huge life change. So it's very, very normal to kind of have a little bit of discomfort and irritability and intense emotions. Understand that part of those emotions are, I almost want to say, biological. So it's not just you. You know how for some women, they kind of do have PMS or like menstrual symptom, and they kind of have very intense irritability, or their hormones kind of have a huge impact on them. I actually tell them to kind of pay attention to those things. Pay attention when something comes up for you, because it's very important. For me, it's a sign that your emotions are trying to tell you that this is important. So anything that comes up for you as an anxiety, as a case of insecurity, let it come up. Don't say, hey, I'm being irrational. Let it come up, but make sure that you're in a calm space to be able to address it.
Yeah.
Because if you are feeling a certain way, or something's come up and you're feeling this intensely, then make sure that you kind of are calm enough to address it.
Mhm.
Because if you're going to be agitated, it's not really going to help.
Mhm. And it would be difficult for others around you to understand you if you're not calm and yes.
Exactly. Or they might dismiss you, kind of going, okay, she's just pregnant and she's just sort of, hormonal right now. But if
Okay.
you're calm, if you're kind of, thought it through, then people will kind of listen.
Okay, I have to add something here. How do you prepare people around you that you will be hormonal, or it is biological, it is okay to, let out your aggression, to say something, how you feel? How do we prepare people around us?
I I don't think you kind of really need to prepare people around you in the sense of telling them this might happen, because it might not happen. So, preparing people when it might not happen, because there are women out there who kind of have a very, very uncomplicated pregnancy journey. They are not hormonal, they are not irritable, and all of that.
Hmm.
And on the other hand, you kind of sometimes have women who kind of do have a lot of issues. So I think it's very individual. I think the way you can prepare people when you're going through it is to talk to them about it. So I mean that in terms of, when you are having some mood swings, after your mood is a little calmer, go apologize. Tell somebody that, you know what, I was really agitated just a few minutes ago. I'm not sure why. I seem to be having some mood swings. Talk to somebody as you're going through it, because for me, that is actually the best communication. Because when you're telling somebody as you're going through it, they can see that, okay, there are times she's calm, there's times she's agitated, so it's not just throughout.
Mhm.
Taking people on that journey with you, for me, is the best way to kind of spread that awareness and information.
Yes, and communication always helps. It always does.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Another thing that even sometimes I go through, and no matter how much I try to, I feel like I've overcome this, but I always feel like there are times when I just do not understand. It's the mom guilt. I know every mother working, stay at home, they just go through it. What is the best way to address it to yourself, and what is the best way to deal with it?
Well, thank you for kind of bringing up that question. I think that's one of those things that isn't actually very recognized. That I think all moms kind of need to hear it, because sometimes when they're going through mom guilt, they kind of feel like it's a pressure that it kind of sounds like, for them, if they don't know that it's something other moms are experiencing, they will kind of just take it on themselves that, oh, no, no, I'm failing. That guilt sometimes is a sign for them that I'm doing something wrong, or I'm failing at being a mom, or I'm not doing something correctly. But that's not it. More often than not, for me, part of it is recognizing that, where is your mom guilt kind of coming from? Is your mom guilt there because you want to, because you're kind of not attentive enough or present enough? Or is it because you have some kind of unrealistic ideas or expectations of what kind of a mom you want to be? So for me, a big source of that guilt kind of comes from, societal pressure on moms to kind of be a certain kind of mom, or pressure that kind of comes from your partner or from, a friend of yours who looks like they're doing it really well or something like that. So I think mom guilt is, for me, the best way to kind of address it is to kind of sit back and kind of look at, well, what kind of a mom do I want to be? And how can I be that mom? How can I be the mom I want to be that my child needs me to be?
Mm.
Because I think, for every child, it's going to be different. And for every mom in every situation and every circumstance, it's going to be different. Do I have unrealistic expectations of myself? Am I setting myself up to fail? By asking yourself those questions, you can try and make sure that whatever guilt you feel, you can kind of make sure that you are able to kind of give yourself a break and go, you know what, I'm doing my best. I'm absolutely doing my best. And because having unrealistic expectations of yourself, it's not going to help.
So it's the talk that we need to have with ourselves, because people will have unrealistic expectations from a mother, with extended family, husband, or maybe, like you said, your friend is doing or your sister is doing. So it's the best thing to sit down with yourself and let yourself know what kind of a mother you want to be, and then take it from there. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Another thing that a question that was recurrent was how to handle your marriage, or like the complications, or like the little the how your marriage shifts after having a baby. Before it was different, obviously, because you do not have a child, it's just you and your husband. But after having a baby, there are some issues, or there are some problems, or you are a different person. Sometimes you are a different person, but you have a now, and your priorities have changed. Maybe the husband is feeling a little neglected, or the wife feels like she's not doing enough for the husband because the baby has occupied all her time. How do you address that?
Well, first of all, again, I go back to realistic expectations. I think one of the things that has to be recognized, because I'm also sort of a marriage counselor, one of the things that I tell, a lot of times couples end up coming to me when the baby is about 18 months to 2 years old, because I feel like that is when people kind of recognize and they finally have the mental space and the energy to kind of focus on themselves as a couple. I think before that, especially when you've kind of had a child or two children back to back, sometimes you kind of again have this idea of what you wanted your journey as motherhood to kind of be, but part of that is also an expectation of your partner. As you mentioned, you've changed massively when you kind of become a mom for the first time, and I think people cannot anticipate that change. It just kind of really happens, and it takes you by surprise. Even if you think you're going to change, you change so much more than you think you will. And that's really normal. But part of that is also then kind of going, okay, if you've changed, then your partner will have changed as well. So that means your relationship has to change. So both of you have to kind of take the time out whenever you can. Prioritize the baby, prioritize yourself, and then prioritize the relationship once you have the time and energy. When you don't have the time and energy, still spend a little bit of time kind of communicating with your partner and kind of just try and see if you guys can talk about where you guys are at. If you have expectations of your partner, be clear that this is what I need from you. This is where I'm at as a mom. This is my expectations of you as a father, because the kind of father you want your partner to be might be different from the kind of father that they want to be. They might think I'm involved enough. You might kind of think, no, you're not supporting me. You're not involved enough. I'm doing more than my father did. Well, yes, but I'm also we have a different situation and circumstance. So for me, that also has to be something that they have to kind of talk about. They have to talk about expectations.
Yeah, I think a rational conversation, when you sit down and you're calm and you're not just, angry and saying things calmly, when
Yeah.
you think about it, maybe you will have to have like more than two conversations, three conversations. It's always nice to put it out there what you're expecting and how you want things to be. I think that's very nice.
Absolutely.
Is always the key.
Absolutely. For a relationship in particular, communication of your needs is always the key, because I think sometimes we absolutely love it when our partner can kind of read our mind and provide for us without us asking. But
Mhm.
for me personally, when I'm working with a client, one of the things that I always tell them, that I think there's a great empowerment in asking for your need. Because by asking for your need, what you're kind of in essence doing is you're telling you're telling yourself, I have a right to this need.
Okay, I'll just add one more question here. So, you're saying that you have to ask for your needs. What if a person does that,
Mhm,
does not get a response,
mhm.
or the response is not as you have expected it to be, and you'll have to do it again? How do one tell themselves that, okay, do not take it on your ego, and just have another conversation about it another day?
Well, see, I think what really helps with that is to ask yourself, actually, so when you asked for your need, were you specific? So when you ask for just support, for
Mm.
example, you're asking for support. Let's say you've kind of had a bad day with work and you're asking your partner for support, but you haven't told your partner what support looks like for you. Your partner is going to give you their version of support. They're not going to give you your version of support. So
Mhm.
I think that that you have to be specific. I need, when I'm having a bad day, when I come home, if you give me a hug, it makes me feel so much better. And then sometimes they kind of don't remember, and you kind of go, where's my hug?
Mm.
And they apologize and they give you the hug. So for me around here, the idea would be, if you're not getting your needs met, kind of stop and actually think about whether you've been specific enough. But one of the other things that I always tell a couple, always, if you treat a problem like it's between the two of you
Mm.
versus treating a problem like you're both trying to problem solve together, you will be so much more effective if it's you versus both of you versus the problem,
Mm.
rather than it being your problem or your partner's problem.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. You don't have to be against each other. You have to be against the problem and
Ex-
actually find for a solution. Yeah.
Exactly that. Exactly that.
But this is something that I've learned today, that I have to be more specific about my need, what exactly I want. Just say it out there and not just beat around the bush. That's
Well, that, and also it's not just about beating around the bush, but if you have to understand, different people have different perspectives on things. Like, if you ask for support, as I said, if you ask for love, what you find loving will be different from what your partner might find loving. So
yeah,
if you ask your partner for some love and affection, your partner will give you love and affection their way,
100%.
which might not be your way. So
Yeah. So better be specific with words.
exactly.
We'll move on to the next question, which I feel nobody talks about. Even if you have a friend, you want to discuss it with them, I think they also do not want to address this issue. Somebody who's gone through a miscarriage, somebody who's lost a baby, it could be, before birth, after birth. Nobody talks about it. I don't think there are any support forums also for this. There are many, but people are from different places, culture, it's very different. How do you address this issue?
So you're talking about grief or loss during a pregnancy or after a pregnancy.
A miscarriage. Okay, let's talk about a miscarriage first.
So for me, miscarriage, because there's two separate things you're kind of talking about. So as you said, let's talk about miscarriage first. In
Mhm.
some ways, miscarriage is something that happens to literally 1 in 3 women. And you're right, it's not spoken about. For example, even that culture and tradition of not telling people about your pregnancy before you are done with the first trimester. If you think about it, it's rooted in very much that thing, that
Mhm.
you're not supposed to speak up about that.
Yeah.
But for me around here, you kind of have to acknowledge that you've lost something. For me, with regards to miscarriage, it's an acknowledgement of that loss, and take your time and grieve. You've lost something, because I know sometimes it feels like something wasn't actually really there. So what have I truly lost? And
Mm.
for me, the answer is, you lost all the hopes and dreams you had associated. You lost all the, all the dreams, all the, like, the moment you kind of hear that you're pregnant, you start thinking about a future. For me, a woman kind of starts that journey of becoming a mom way before she's pregnant, actually. Sometimes even when she's trying to conceive, in some ways, she's on the journey to become a mom. So for me, every time, women are going through fertility issues or miscarriage, which is just so much worse because you then kind of feel like, yes, I've become a mom now. And then you have that sense of disappointment. For me, that's a very, very real grief. So, I mean, for me, I would say treat it the way that you would talk about losing anybody else. Would you hide it from somebody if you lost a family member? No. Why would you then hide it from the world if you've lost something and you've had a miscarriage? Grief and loss is grief and loss. You've lost something. You've lost the opportunity to kind of become a mom to that child. It's a huge loss. So for me, talk about it. Get your support. All cultures and traditions have ways of dealing with grief because all cultures and traditions recognize that grief is a big thing.
It is. And for the moms who lose their young children, how do they cope up with the grief and loss?
For that, I would kind of say there's a lot of support groups, but any parent can empathize that that's actually one of the hardest things for people to kind of cope with. What I'll also kind of add over here, for that, I would kind of really say that, maybe you need to kind of, whenever you're ready, kind of go for some grief therapy because losing a child, I think would be what's kind of classified as complicated grief. And it's a very huge thing. It's a very big thing. There are a lot of support groups for that. There's a lot of help that people can kind of get for that. And whenever they're ready, I would think therapy can maybe help them with that journey as well. Because for me, understanding grief is understanding that grief is something that has an impact on somebody. They kind of, it can kind of, your grief doesn't become smaller. You kind of just learn to live with it in some ways. You learn to kind of be desensitized with it. But for me, with the loss of a child, it's what I would kind of call a living grief, whereby, what would the child have been like at this age? What would the child have been like at that age? There's a lot of ongoing grief that happens over and over again. And there needs to be an acknowledgement of that. There needs to be an acknowledgement that it's going to be an ongoing grief. You cannot treat it like, I lost this person, this happened, I'm moving forward. That's not how, grief in that instance works. What I kind of want to very briefly also touch on, though, is what happens when somebody kind of loses somebody else, like a family member, or someone like that, when after you've had a child or during pregnancy. Sometimes people kind of say, oh, don't cry because, it's going to have an impact on the child. I would kind of say slightly differently that, allow yourself to grieve. Don't suppress your emotions. The more you suppress that emotion, the more it'll kind of come back later on when you allow it to come back. When you suppress grief, it kind of multiplies and it kind of grows much bigger. So allow yourself to grieve. And it's okay, but also do take care of yourself, because you're not just taking care of yourself, you're taking care of another being. So that, and also once you had a child, sometimes grief and loss, if it happens at that point in time, because life happens, life goes on, so when that happens, you also have to kind of acknowledge that because you're grieving, you kind of have to be nicer to yourself. So I kind of call grief to be one of those background processes that is constantly running, that when you kind of have lost somebody, grief is like a background process that's constantly running that kind of really just takes a lot of energy out of you, and it can really have an impact on your emotions. So when that's happening, make sure you kind of get some support. Make sure that you have some time whereby you can grieve, because if you're just going to keep suppressing it and pretending like it's not there, that's not going to work.
Yeah, that's not going to work. Thank you so much for addressing it and addressing the issue that while if you're pregnant and you lose someone, how to deal with that. And it's okay to allow yourself to grieve. And if you're able to, it's also okay to go for therapy whenever you're ready. Because that is also
absolutely
stigma around mental health, that, people do not, because of the guilt or because of the shame around, you don't need it, or therapy is not for you because they don't recognize mental illness.
Yeah.
So thank you so
No,
much.
with grief also there's the idea that it's normal, and it is normal, but that doesn't mean that everyone can cope with it. Sometimes even normal stressful situations are ones that we kind of need some support around, and that's okay.
That's okay. That's okay. Topic that we're going to touch is is still, I feel, I think 7, 8 years ago, the awareness, the way, the mother, the husband understand what they say about post.
Sorry, I couldn't hear you, Verda. Your voice was cutting off a little bit. Could I ask you to just kind of repeat, please? Sorry.
Hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're going to talk because like there isn't much awareness. Now people talk about I think it was very lack about that.
Sorry, at the end, your voice cut off. I'm so sorry.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah,
I
much
think
better.
I can hear back my voice.
I can hear you better now. Now it's not cutting off anymore.
Okay, we're going to talk about postpartum depression now.
Yes.
There wasn't much awareness a few years ago. There is now, people do talk about it now, people recognize it now, but still there are so many people who just completely, ignore the issue and say, there's nothing to it. What do you have to say about it?
So first thing that I'll kind of say is that I will actually recognize two separate things. So along with postpartum depression, there's also postpartum anxiety. So, and that's only a recent recognition. You're right. I think a few years ago, there was not that much of awareness around postpartum depression. Now there's more, but now they've also introduced a separate category called postpartum anxiety because there's a recognition that those are two separate things. You can have postpartum depression and you can have postpartum anxiety. So first things first, let me kind of just tell you that postpartum depression is one of those things that's kind of really common. The estimates are literally it can happen to 1 in 7 or 1 in 9 women. So it's actually really, really common. First of all. Second of all, also postpartum, I think it also has to be recognized that postpartum depression is something that can happen, that actually statistically happens more often when you kind of have a boy. You're more likely to have postpartum depression if you have a boy than if you have a girl. So those hormones have a big impact, I would say. But I'll also kind of separate out two separate things. So there's one thing called baby blues, which is something that occurs after somebody has delivered, whereby for up to a period of 2 weeks, sometimes women will be a little bit more weepy, a little bit more emotional, a little bit more sort of irritable, and they'll have sometimes trouble sleeping for the first 2 weeks. That's called the baby blues, and that very often happens purely hormonally because your estrogen and progesterone levels during the pregnancy are really high, and there's a sudden drop in that. So that kind of causes a little bit of what's kind of called the baby blues, whereby for up to 2 weeks. But after that, after 6 weeks, sometimes even during pregnancy. So one of the things that has to be recognized about postpartum depression is that it can actually start during pregnancy rather than after delivering the baby. So postpartum depression is classified as a period of time that starts during the pregnancy. It can be diagnosed up to 6 weeks after the baby is born, or it can actually even be diagnosed a year after the baby is born. So sometimes people will have postpartum depression for even a year after the baby is born. And because it can happen at any time during that. Coping with a baby in the first year is a very, very difficult task. There's a lot of emotional things that kind of happen. So that's a big part of it. I will also kind of add with postpartum depression, how do you kind of deal with it? First things first, recognize it. Recognize when you're not feeling yourself. Recognize when you feel overwhelmed, when you're finding it difficult to get yourself out of bed, when you're finding it difficult to kind of get attached to the baby, or when you just kind of want to isolate yourself. Recognize it. And as we kind of said earlier about any kind of changes, talk about it with the people around you. Make them aware of how you're feeling. Get help. There's medication, therapy can help as well. And for me, around here, part of it is also just kind of recognizing and kind of taking care of yourself, some self-care with regards to sort of making sure you do sleep, kind of deprioritizing other tasks and prioritizing yourself and your mental health, for me, is something that's so important. With with postpartum depression in particular, one of the reasons why it does occur sometimes is when people feel very unsupported.
Yeah.
So try and get support from around you. And I will also say this, having a baby be dependent on you, I know it's a huge task. So sometimes people are like, when do I have the time for self-care? For new mothers in particular, when do I have the time for self-care? It doesn't have to be very huge. It can just be 10 minutes. Take 10 minutes out and go and take a 5-minute longer shower than you normally would. Just give yourself a few extra minutes to shower. Give yourself a few minutes of reading a book. Give yourself just a few minutes. It doesn't have to be huge. It can be making a cup of tea and just sitting down and drinking it, and kind of asking somebody to kind of, your husband, whoever, to take care of the baby for just 5 minutes so you can have a cup of tea in peace.
It helps.
Prioritizing yourself in these small ways really goes a long way to kind of take care of your mental health.
It does. This was the practice. Got myself out of postpartum. Got time for myself.
Good.
Thank you so much.
Good.
Thank you so much for answering all the most current questions.
Sorry?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you now.
So thank you so much, Dr. Lavina, for answering all these questions. I'm going to save this time so that everybody can go back and watch it again. But thank you so much, and thank you, Johnson, for letting us have this live today and address it.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
It's a very important issue. I'm glad that they've done a campaign on that.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Have a nice day.
Thank you, Rita. Take care. Bye-bye.